Hey, what's up, guys, and welcome back to this two-part series on rejection and boundaries. Today, we are talking about one of my least favorite topics to talk about. Perhaps that's because I've had to do so much work around it. What are boundaries? This quote right here really hits home for me. Boundaries do not reject people, boundaries reject behaviors. And, for me, that's something in my life that, is very difficult at times. I've always taken everything so personally and taken on the energy and bad vibes of other people, which can be very counterproductive, whether we're talking about in life or in business, and it just really is counterproductive to growth and getting better in any aspect of our lives. So let's, without further ado, get right into defining boundaries and how we can improve these in our lives. But before we do that, if you have yet to subscribe to my channel, I encourage you to click that link below where it says subscribe. And if you enjoy this content, please hit the like and feel free to comment as you please. So moving on, what are boundaries? How do boundaries serve us? So essentially, there are three purposes in which boundaries are used for us in our lives. And a lot of this content, I have to give credit to Pia Melody, who runs the Meadows Rehabilitation Center out in Arizona. She was a pioneer with a lot of this research, and her books on codependency and intimacy disorders are just absolutely revolutionary and have helped me in my life, not only in my relationships, but as well as how I conduct business as well. So boundary systems are invisible and symbolic force fields that have three purposes. Now, purpose one is to keep people from coming into our space and abusing us. Purpose two, to keep us from going into the space of others and abusing them. And purpose three, to give each of us a way to embody our sense of who we are. So let's think about purpose one. What's an example of avoiding people coming into our space and abusing us? Now, that can be both as an external or internal, which we'll talk about more in a following clip. But, boundaries, as it says up top, they're invisible and symbolic force fields. And so if you think about not allowing people to literally come into our space mentally as well as physically, this is something that you have to do work with, and it's a practice, guys. It's something that you literally need to practice each and every day. And the most simple boundary is quite simply no or yes. Those are when we give people permission to come into our space and create, relationships and intimacy. That is the first boundary in which we learn in our life at a very early age. The same applies in purpose two, which is to not allow us to violate others' boundaries, which is to say we need to keep very clear and concise ideas of, being respectful of other people's space and their well-being as well. And in business, that means when, someone says no, they don't want your product, your service, whatever it is that you're offering, and that's a cue to tell you, that it might not be a good fit, or perhaps, you just aren't approaching it in the right situation or in the right way, I should say. Purpose three is very unique when it says to give each of us a way to embody our sense of who we are. Another way of putting that is that a boundary dictates where self begins and where it ends. And so, a lot of times people will reference empathy as taking on another person's feelings or emotions. But in my opinion, that's more so codependency. And a lot of times people who get very drained by other people's energies, they're really taking on stuff which doesn't belong to them. So we have to be really careful of that at times, because hypervigilance, some people think that's a great thing, especially in the world and the society that we live in, to be aware of our surroundings. It's very important, but to do so in an overly draining type of way is absolutely exhausting. It will drain us of all usefulness to ourselves and to others. So moving on, we were just talking about the two basic types of boundaries, our internal and external boundaries. So our internal boundaries keep the world of our thoughts, feelings, and attitudes and behaviors separate from others. Again, this is where we were talking about, an example of where self begins and where self ends. And for me, I have been told much in my life, and I shared about it in the last video. Others' opinions of you are none of your business. And that is, I think, very challenging for us in life who are codependent, who are needy, who constantly need validation from others. And so in working on ourselves and, a lot of positive affirmations, working on mindset, improving your ability to be of use and benefit to others, we start to recognize our internal boundaries as to, what is mine, what is my reality, and what is someone else's. Now, external boundaries, in my opinion, they're a little bit more common sense in the fact that external boundaries negotiate a literal space between us and others in the physical and sexual world. So, I remember like in middle school dances, teachers would walk around and kind of make sure, there was about a 18-inch space, I guess. And I've heard of back in the day, literally using a ruler stick to go and kind of negotiate that space. But if you're cued into others' body language, which I think a lot of us can violate that at times, because some people just say, "Oh, I'm a hugger, please excuse me," whatever. You need to be tuned into that. And I mean, a lot of times I've walked up to someone with, my hand out extended for a handshake, and then they just come in for the real thing. No, I'm a hugger, bring it in. That's actually a boundary violation. And it might not seem like the biggest of deals in our society where a lot of people are rather touchy-feely. But for people who have been traumatized or, violated sexually, mentally, emotionally, spiritually in their life, that can be very traumatic experience. So we do need to think about that and be respectful. Now, moving on. This is something that's really big that I've talked about in various depths before. There's 5 core issues of codependency, and this is absolutely relevant and pertinent to what I would say are, business and relationships of any sort, whether romantic, platonic, a working relationship, anything like that. If you get these core issues in check, you will have better and healthier relationships. Now, number one, this is a challenging one for me. This is probably one of my biggest challenges in life. Experiencing appropriate levels of self-esteem. The key word in there for me is appropriate, and I'll tell you why. Because in my life, those of you who've known me know that I'm a survivor of childhood trauma. I was a top level bodybuilder in the United States in the late 90s, best in the country. And a lot of my self-esteem came from others. So that's called being other esteemed. I got the big fancy car with the big 24-inch rims when I'm 20 years old, and I relied solely for my sense of being okay, of having value in the world, as to how much praise, how much validation, how much media presence was I getting. Was I getting sponsorship endorsements from companies for my various successes? And that is not an appropriate level of self-esteem. That is an extreme level of being other esteemed. So there's a lot of different ways in which you can gain appropriate levels of self-esteem, but you need to first and foremost have an awareness of, am I experiencing appropriate levels of self-esteem, or am I being other esteemed by being very needy, very codependent, and then also, boundary lists. Going on to number 2, setting functional boundaries. Now, functional boundaries have everything to do with what we're talking about in this video. And, if you're, say, in a business relationship with a partner, these types of things need to be worked out on a personal level by means of communication. Boundary systems are going to be different for each relationship, and that is a matter of good communication between, what is appropriate for you may not be appropriate for someone else. So, you need to have space. You need to conduct yourself with integrity and honesty and love, and keep an open mind to the fact that, number three, their reality might not be your own. Now, this one's kind of tricky as well, and I'll tell you why. Owning and expressing their own reality. That's number three core issue of codependency. Now, reality distortion is essentially when we believe things are a certain way, and they're really not. And I go around making up stories, you know, all day long, and that's just called left brain thinking. That is essentially when we go off on a tangent. Somebody cuts you off in traffic, and you make it up that they've been waiting their whole life just to do that. Just crazy distorted thinking, things like that. That's an extreme example, but something as simple as someone is having a bad day and they happen to look a certain way at you or towards you, has nothing to do with you, but you take it on as your own. That again is being boundaryless, and it is also having a distorted reality. Number four, this goes into taking care of their own adult needs and wants. Now, needs and wants are something that I think the line can get very blurry for those of us who struggle with codependency and boundary issues. So you really need to break that down on a simple level, as to when you have any type of relationship conversation, what is needed and what is wanted, and the outcome might not be necessarily what you want, but oftentimes, if you have a good sense of one, two, and three, then four essentially takes care of itself. If you have good, healthy self-esteem, if you bring a functional boundary to any given situation where you're expressing your wants and needs, and you're doing a good job of expressing your reality of those things, then you have a better chance of being able to accept, when things don't necessarily go your way. But regardless, you'll still be able to take care of yourself, even if someone else doesn't give you what it is that you want. And most of the time, I find that that's a play on power and control. And so, going into the serenity prayer, for instance, accept the things I can't change, courage to change what I can, and wisdom to know the difference. And so, a lot of those things are very pertinent when it comes to taking care of yourself and not blaming others for not having the life that you wish to live. Number five, experiencing and expressing their reality moderately. I am in recovery from drug addiction, alcoholism, sex addiction, pornography addiction, you name it. I have not lived my life moderately, going back to things that the world would perceive as healthy, such as bodybuilding. Bodybuilding was absolutely not moderate whatsoever. I could have gone into the gym and said, hey, I want to, start working out to get a little bit of muscle. But no, I said, I want to be the best in the world, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes. And that was the same way I approached drugs and alcohol. I didn't want to just, have a drink to take the edge off. I wanted to feel the most intoxicated that you could possibly feel. Now, that is an example of lacking moderation. And individuals with codependency issues, and especially addicts, have a very difficult time in experiencing and expressing their reality moderately. And I still, to this day, can drift off into the ism of workaholism. Any type of thing in that nature is very tricky. But when you're lacking moderation, you can absolutely get a very unmanageable life in a hurry, and things can get absolutely out of control, even if society perceives what you're doing to be beneficial. But I'm telling you, you can absolutely go off the deep end, even if you've got millions of dollars coming in. So first and foremost, you need to take care of what's between these ears, or otherwise all that money, all that prestige, prominence, and fame is headed out the door. I promise you, I've experienced it before. So the next the next shot that I want to share with you is this is something very important to remember here. I'm going to shift this down here. So boundaries, this is where boundaries come from. Boundaries must be learned. Infants and very young children have no natural boundaries, which is developmentally appropriate. So we depend upon our parents or other primary caregivers to teach and model the behavior associated with functional boundaries. We will take on whatever boundaries we saw most frequently in childhood. So what this means to me is that whatever it is that we were taught, whether it was good, bad, or indifferent, that is what we will more than likely exhibit. That is what we will put off onto others in life. So if we learned bad habits as a child, more than likely our life is going to be an example of the exact same thing. So, in my life, I've always said, when I get into something, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent for me, I get into it 100%. And that is a learned behavior in my life. That's something that was instilled in me in a very early age, and it is something in which I have a challenge with, experiencing moderation. So the moderation and then esteem issues are probably the most prominent ones for me. But I think the key in this particular slide right here is the fact that we depend upon our parents or other primary caregivers to teach and model the behavior associated, but we will take on whatever boundaries we saw most frequently in childhood. So, that's a really big one there to remember, guys, that if you grew up in dysfunction, there's a good possibility you are currently, as an adult, acting in dysfunction, that you don't have a functional adult on board, and that's not your fault. So there's nothing to need to necessarily shame yourself about. Even all of the emotions that we have, shame, all of that type of stuff, they have gifts that come with it. Essentially, shame is just saying we're slightly offline and need to be redirected back into the middle. And so, don't beat yourself up if what you're hearing right now doesn't make sense to you, or you're like, well, damn, I'm not at all living this way. So it's completely understandable. Um, this is there's a great drawing of this, and I'll see if I can just kind of word it for you. So these are the different types of boundary systems. An intact boundary system is the most healthy. This is what we all strive for. So this is protection and vulnerability. So this is a willingness to have people come into our lives and to go into the lives of others in a protected way, not in a flamboyant, oh, here I am, like that type of way, or, also not just like, I need you, I can't live without you, smothering type of relationships. So non-existent boundaries are just what I just said, like, I need you, I can't live without you, you make me feel, all of that type of stuff. Now, damaged boundary systems are unique because this is when we partially or have selective boundaries where, for instance, we might have very good boundaries at work where we're respectful and respectable towards our colleagues, towards our boss, or maybe just the opposite. Maybe we have good boundaries at home, but we say, screw the boss, that type of thing. The walls instead of boundaries are, the previous one, damage boundaries, is like a dotted line, whereas like unhealthy behaviors can slip through. But then non-existent boundaries is like if you tore a fence down, and then the intact boundaries is a fence. But walls instead of boundaries are examples of that would be when you see someone lashing out in anger or fear or silence or words. That is just an example of being developmentally immature. And so, a lot of times we take that stuff so personally, but it's simply an example of dysfunction, of lacking boundaries. And so a lot of times as well, the last one here, we can move from non-existent boundaries to walls and back again, and go through a cycle of this because we're not perfect in life. And so, none of us will ever, necessarily perfect any of these systems or stay in one. And that goes for all of the different systems we talked about today. Now, an external physical boundary An example of that is you create the self-protective part of your external boundary when someone is approaching you. You do this by determining how close you allow the person to stand to you. We talked about that at the middle school dance, and whether or not you're going to allow him or her to touch you. You create the other protective part of your external physical boundary when you are physically approaching another person. You do this by being respectful of there's the 18-inch measuring stick, social distance between you and the person, not touching him or her without his or her permission. And the same applies to, when we get into a physically intimate relationship, these types of things have to be negotiated. So I'll briefly just read this. This was pretty self-explanatory. You create the self-protective part of your external boundary when someone is sexually approaching you. This very much similar. The difference is in the middle right here. If you agree to be sexual, you then negotiate the issues regarding when, where, and how. And so that's pretty self-explanatory there with regard to just external physical or sexual boundaries. And then the internal boundary, this one is the one without a doubt that I struggle with the most. You establish the self-protective part of your internal boundary when someone is talking. That's remembering where self begins and ends. First, you set your personal boundary. Then say to yourself that the other person is responsible for creating what he or she is saying. You only take into yourself what is the truth for you, reality distortion. Block the rest by following this procedure. If it is true, let the information in, embrace it, and allow yourself to have feelings about it. It doesn't matter what those feelings are. A lot of times we need to be aware when we start beating up on ourselves, things like that. But if you determine that the information is not true, allow it to bounce off your boundary. This is called having a dyadic relationship where we take something in, process it, and send it back out into the world without having to make it our own. I'm telling you, this is not my forte. I am not an expert on this. In fact, that's a big struggle for me. If the data is questionable, gather data regarding the information. That is an example of using both of our brain hemispheres. The left brain is the more analytical, but it can also be the storytelling. The right brain is more so where we have emotion and feeling. And so the ideal is to have these working in unison, because a lot of times my left brain lies to me, and that's where I'll get a distorted reality, and I'll start making up stories, and that can be really challenging. Now, this next picture is a self-portrait of who I can be on any given day. This is called Cartman's triangle, or the drama triangle. And this is also an example of lacking boundaries. Now, if you think about people in your life, or even just think about yourself, much better than thinking about and pointing the finger and blaming others in your life. Think about this standpoint of this triangle, and look at and just see if you've ever played any of these roles. Have you ever been the victim in a pity party? Have you ever been the rescuer coming in to rescue someone's problems and be the fixer, kind of a Jesus complex, if you will? Or have you ever been the persecutor and blamed someone for your problems, for the current situation in which you're in, being a bit of a bully, and might not have anything to do with them at the given time? And so we are always boundaryless when we move throughout this triangle, and we can be in any given state and move from one to another within a given day, within an hour. So, that is not uncommon at all to experience all of those things. I mean, especially people with various mental health disorders, like a bipolar person can bounce all over the place on this. Someone borderline, schizophrenic, any of those can happen. Now, this is a little tough to see. I know this is a little blurry, but you can look up Cartman's triangle, and I'll put a link for it down below as well. So this is, again, called the drama triangle. But again, take a look at all of these. And right in the middle here of the triangle, it says we move around the triangle until one of us moves out and into a clear and healthy communication pattern. Be the one, be the change you want in the conversation. So let's look up at the top left. There's an example of the persecutor. These are a little bit out of order from that last frame, so bear with me on that. That's the persecutor, or the bully. An example of what someone who is a bully would say is, this is your fault, you're not okay, but I am. They're critical, they put you down, they're rigid, they're bossy. So what you have to do with this individual is state your boundaries and actively listen, make your expectations clear, and provide choices. Examples of that in boundaries would be, I'm willing to listen to you for X amount of minutes, and you need to dictate and make clear a very specific time frame. Actively listen. I'm willing to listen to your problem without making it mine to solve. And making your expectations clear of, I want you to keep your agreement. Please have it done by Tuesday, and then provide choices. You can either keep your agreement or I will no longer be involved. You choose. So this is just absolutely great information for anyone. This is applicable to bosses, to employees, to family members who deal with dysfunctional individuals. Huge in sales, as well as just any type of relationship we deal with in life. This has been so valuable for me in all of my relationships. I've definitely played the victim in my life as well, especially in active addiction. It was poor me. If you had my life, you would drink and use drugs just like me. But we've got to take accountability, and we can't rely on the top right, the rescuer, to come in and save me. It has to come from our own will, from our own volition. And so, this has been an absolutely great opportunity for me to share with you guys on boundaries. I hope that you all enjoyed this. This is something that my mentor always tells me each and every day. Love and accept yourself today for being the perfectly imperfect human being you were created to be. And one of the other things that I say in doing my affirmations to get that esteem in check and in order is, I love and accept myself today for being human the way I know God does, and I will be kind and gentle with myself and others today. Thanks so much for joining me today, guys, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks so much for letting me share.